Hello and welcome back to A New Way to Museum. I am your host for the day, Curtis Schmidt, the Zoological Collections Manager here at Sternberg. What I'm going to talk to you about today is one of my favorite groups of animals, bats. And as springtime has approached, I'll say, because it is spring, but it snowed out yesterday, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these things because the migrators are coming in, they're migrating through. The ones that hibernate in the area are starting to come out as insects come out and start their feeding. So this, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite groups of animals. I'm kind of a strange individual in that I like to study things that most people hate. And I don't understand why people hate these things, why people hate bats so much, other than they seem to hate things that are very much different than people. So snakes and lizards and bats and things like that, they're just very, very different. But they're mostly just misunderstood. So what I'm going to talk to you today is about some of the different species that we have here in the state of Kansas. We've got 17 different species in the state, which most people don't realize. That's quite a few for one state. So we're going to start with the anatomy of a bat. So if you look at this skeleton right here, you can see that they've got all the same bones that we do with the exception of the tail. A lot of people don't realize though that when we're embryos, we have a tail. The tail just goes away as we develop. But if you look at the bat, you're going to see a lot of similar features. Basically, the wings are the fingers and the arms of the bat. This little guy that sticks up right here, that's the thumb. So they just have really long expanded fingers. The forearm, very long as well. And then if you look at it, it's got everything else that we do. The same structures. Now bats are the only group of organisms, that, aside from birds, that are capable of true flight. And obviously insects and things like that. They're the only mammals that are capable of true flight. There's lots of mammals out there that glide and have wing membranes and things like that, but they can't actually use powered flight. And so they're very similar to birds structurally in the fact that their bones are hollow. They have hollow spaces in their bones. They're very fragile. The reason why is because it makes them very light, makes them easier to lift off and stay in the air. So you can see, very, very similar. And I'm going to pick up one of these guys, and we're going to look at these things just a little more closely. So this is a hoary bat. And all of the bats that are in Kansas are insectivores, so they're eating insects. We don't have any fruit bats. We don't have any pollen-eating bats. So all of the ones in Kansas are eating insects. So they've either got to do one of two things, just like the birds do. They've got to either follow the insects during the winter, so they migrate to where the insects are still abundant and still flying, or they go into hibernation, because obviously they don't have insects during the winter. We don't have things flying around because it's too cold at night. So they go into torpor, they go into hibernation. This one right here, the hoary bat, is actually a migrator. And you can tell by looking at the structure and the shape of the wings. The wings are very long, narrow. So that's a development that helps them go long distances. So they're built for long distance flight. Whereas bats like this tricolored bat, if you look at the differences there, you can see it's much shorter, much squatter, short, broad wings, because they don't migrate. This one's a hibernator. And basically the ones that hibernate and live in this area have broader wings because they're more maneuverable that way. So they can fly around and they can move much easier to catch those insects. So these are built for maneuverability as opposed to long distance flight. So as you're looking through some of these different species, pay attention to the shapes of those wings. So let's go back to anatomy real quick, and I'll show you some things on this hoary bat. So you can see the bones in there. And then they've got wing membranes, which is basically just skin. And they're called patagia or patagium. So a single patagium or multiple patagia. So the ones in the wing are known as the protopatagium. And then you've got the one between the legs and the tail, which is called the uropatagium. Most bats use that uropatagium in flight to catch their insects. So they use their sonar, basically they're making their clicking sounds and things like that, and they're bouncing off of objects and coming back to locate their prey, to locate the insects that they're catching. Once they get close enough, they swoop it up with that basically it works like a net. They grab it, they hold on to it, and then they go eat it somewhere. So just like any other group of organisms, when we're identifying bats, we're looking at a combination of different characters. Now these are stuffed and skinned, so these are used for teaching. So we're not going to be able to see a lot of the different characters. But we use things like forearm length. So size is a big character that we can use to identify bats. And the way that we do that is typically looking at the forearm length. Hoary bats and the ones that are related to them actually have furred uropatagia. So you can see the fur goes all the way to the tip. And those are typically the migrating species as well. So the hoary bat, it's easy to tell because the word hoary means frosted, and it looks like a frosted bat. So you can see right here the thumbs. The thumbs are actually what they use to crawl and climb up things. So if you stick a bat to a tree and it climbs up the tree, it's using its thumbs to do that climbing. So going back to how we identify things, other things that we use are the relative length and shape of the ears. And inside the ear is a fleshy structure called a tragus, which also comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. So we use the shape and size of the ears, the shape and size of the tragus. And the tragus is used along with those ears to help perceive how far away things are as they're using their sonar and their echolocation to figure out how far away and what direction their prey is. So those are different characters that we use. The hoary bat is the largest bat that we have in Kansas. Close relative is the eastern red bat. And you can see why it's called a red bat. Nice red hair. And you can tell it's very closely related to the hoary bat because it's got the furred membrane, the furred uropatagium. And all three of these right here are the main migrators. So we catch them as they're migrating through the state. This last one here is the silver-haired bat, which is just a black bat with silver-tipped hair. And again, you can tell it's closely related to the others because it's got a furred uropatagium. The little guy we were talking about before, the tricolored bat, is one of the smallest species that we have in the state. It's unfortunately one of the species that's getting wiped out by white nose syndrome, which I won't get into right now, but it's a disease that it's basically a fungus that is wiping out bat populations in the U.S. very, very rapidly. And this is one of them that's succumbing to that. So it's soon to be on the protected list in the United States, but one of the smallest species. One of the bigger species, and this is my favorite species right here, this is the pallid bat. You can tell, you see the pallid bat has kind of a nice yellowish color to it. Good sized bat, pretty big bat. Really big ears. And in life, these things almost look like little puppy dogs. They look like little foxes. So they're really, really neat. And they're really good at feeding, they're what we call gleaners. So instead of catching things out of the air, they're actually picking them up when the critters that they're eating are in the trees or on the ground, scorpions, spiders, crickets, things like that. And they will swoop down and grab them. So they eat scorpions and centipedes and things that are crawling around on the ground. One of the very few in Kansas that do that. Another one of the little tiny guys, the western small-footed myotis. This one's interesting because it has a very limited range in the state of Kansas, and it's only the Niobrara chalk outcrops of western Kansas. So it's very interesting, a very isolated population. So only those big Niobrara chalk outcrops that you would find at like Castle Rock or Monument Rocks, places like that. The western small-footed myotis. This one right here is going to be familiar to everybody. If you see a bat in town or in a town, 99 out of 100 times it's going to be this guy, the big brown bat. So this is a hibernating species that roosts in a variety of human-made structures. So what you see around town, what people have in their attics, roosting on their porches, things like that. Very, very common bat, especially around human habitation, where humans live. So you can see it's called a big brown bat, but it's not a huge bat. So that's kind of a misnomer. There's definitely bats that are bigger. Big brown bat, unlike mussels that have very interesting names, big brown bat is kind of not interesting at all. It's a big bat and it's brown, so let's call it a big brown bat. Anyway, that's the most common one around here for sure. In the summertime, we get this guy a lot as well. This is becoming more and more prevalent throughout the state and more common. This is called the evening bat. It's a little smaller, it's more chocolatey brown. Very, very common tree rooster. So this is not roosting in people's houses or in attics or anything like that. It's roosting in trees. So usually where there's trees is where you're going to find the roosts of these guys. This is just another example of a big brown bat. This is one of the least common species in the state, barely comes into the state, and was only recently recognized as coming into the state at all. So this was actually found in very southwest Kansas. The populations probably actually occur in Colorado, and then for whatever reason they came over across the border and just across the border to forage for insects and things like that. So the myotis are very, very small, mouse-like bats, which brings up a very good point. A lot of people think that these are just flying mice. Bats are not related to mice at all, not even closely related. We really don't have much of a fossil record of anything that doesn't look like a modern bat, so we don't know what evolved into bats. But we do know that the closest relatives around today are the shrews and moles and things like that, because they also are insectivores. They eat insects. So all of the bats that we've looked at so far are in one family called Vespertilionidae. There's one other family that's found in the state of Kansas, and that's this guy right here. The free-tailed bats are the family Melosidae. And you can see why they're called free-tailed. These are the easiest things to identify. So the uropatagium, the membrane, does not go all the way to the tip of the tail in the free-tailed bat. And this is a hibernating species. So you usually find them around caves, cave-like structures. So they're not going to hibernate in buildings or human habitation. They're going to hibernate in caves and things like that. So very common in south central Kansas, where we have lots and lots of caves. The ones that you've heard about in the city limits of Austin, Texas, that live under that bridge, where millions of them come out every night, these are all Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bats. So there's your relatively quick introduction to one of my favorite groups of animals, the bats. So thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something today. Please join us next week. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us in A New Way to Museum with the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell for notifications when we release a new video. Support us on Patreon for early access and exclusive content. You can also follow us on all our social media. Links are found in the description. Thanks for watching, and follow your curiosity to new discoveries.